I'm particularly curious because we talked when we sort of touched base about this, we talked about Saturn because, as you know, and as people that listen to the podcast know, I've been doing a lot of work around Saturn as the inner authority and reclaiming it from, I call it the dominator culture because it's the same term, right? It's referring to the patriarchy and the way that we've been taught about power. But I know you've been doing some work around Saturn as well. And I wonder if you could talk about your perspective on that planet, because I'll say one more thing is that I think part of my work with it is realizing that in the astrology world, Saturn and to some degree Mars are kind of like the icons that hold a lot of those dominator culture meanings, and we've lost their original meaning. And I know you've studied history, and yeah, so maybe you could talk a little bit about your views there.
I'm so glad you said that. I think that's so profound and so beautiful for people to understand. I haven't heard it quite put that way before. So that is just a beautiful statement. I appreciate it. It's very inspiring to me. I think you're so right. It's such a beautiful way to put it, because it's almost like they hold the value system that is supposedly the one on the pedestal, that is supposedly the one that is the right or the good or the pious, or kind of in the same way how family is held on this pedestal. You would have thought that Pluto and Cancer would have knocked out that, but not completely, where it's still held as this highest thing you can aspire to do is have a family. But that's just one expression of what's possible in an incarnation to evolve through. I think when people start to understand, and I'll get back to Saturn, but I think this is such a great point. I think when people start to understand what life really is, that we're here to master life, and we look to astrology, to all the 12 archetypes as these areas of life to master, and these areas that explain life, everything in it, anything you can think of. And that's what I kind of teach with my work a lot, is that you could have the family, but you don't have to. If that's just not what you really feel like you want to do, don't be roped into it as a woman. Don't be forced into it. I'm not, that's just not what's right for me. I want my life. I don't want 18 years of diapers and all of that stuff. And, and the same is true with this kind of this hyper achievement and destination focus. And yet, and I think it takes us off of understanding that we have our own greatness. And I think Saturn is really about our own greatness.
Yes.
I think because you talk about how it strips away what's not authentic. I think that's such an important point that I've integrated into my work from you. And I think Saturn is a catalyst. I think it restricts to catalyze. It's kind of like the contractions of birthing a baby. And we go through those same contractions of any creative endeavor. That's why the fifth house is not only children, but creative self-actualization, because the creative thing that we can make could be anything, whether human or a project that's tangible, or our intellectual property that comes from inside of us that we make into a course or something, as feminine entrepreneurs. And so Saturn is this catalyst. I think where Saturn gets challenging, and I had a retreat that I did for 14 weeks called the Goddess Retreat from January to April. And I had so many women in there that had a Saturn return, just happened to be. And it was so fascinating for us all to have these amazing discussions in there, because we were discussing what people's different experience with it. I've had Saturn return. My Saturn return in my late 20s it was nothing. I was going through other things and that were way beyond that. And so it wasn't anything that was stripping me down or away. I also have Saturn retrograde, which is really about the individuation. But some people were like, oh my gosh, I just lost. It was horrible. It was so hard. And I think it's because as it's stripping away everything that's no longer authentic, as you say, we don't know what that is. So we can't necessarily work with Saturn at that time. We just have to let it all melt away. And it can be very startling, very much without the landmarks or the guideposts,